Well, Steve Jobs, I mean, everything you heard about him and seen in movies and, all this stuff is probably a little bit accurate. I mean, he was a very tough guy, very demanding. Working for him was very intimidating because you knew that he would rip you to pieces in public and just humiliate you. I don't know anybody who worked for Steve Jobs who says, I wish I had never done that. I would not be where I am were it not for Steve Jobs. Yeah, so this was about 20 years ago. I was an owner of a 911, a Porsche 911. I was in Menlo Park, California at a stop sign, and I look to my left and there's a car full of teenage girls and they're making eye contact and they're giggling and they're laughing. And so I thought, now I'm really famous. Even teenagers know who I am because of my work at Apple or my books or my speaking. And the girl in the front seat asked me to roll my window down, and she sticks her head out and she says, "Are you Jackie Chan?" And that was a funny moment. I don't know anybody who's remarkable who doesn't have grit. It just takes grit because nothing comes easy. And the more you're trying to accomplish, the harder it's going to be. There's people on the outside looking in saying, "Why do you do that? Oh, it's so hard," and, et cetera, et cetera. But you happen to love it, and that's the key.
Before I begin this podcast, I have a small request. I just saw my YouTube analytics and saw that over 90% of people haven't subscribed to this channel yet. So I have a small favor to ask you. If you've ever found value through this podcast, please do me a small favor, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell icon, leave a comment, like those videos, share them with your friends and family who are trying to build a business or just trying to understand how things work. It would mean the world to me if you do that. It allows me to bring on more guests who are trying to bring more value to you. It just makes this channel bigger so that I can bring on more guests, help you answer a question, essentially trying to bring value to you. You can also ask me a question in the comments and I can ask them to the guests or I can answer them myself. So please do me a small favor, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell icon, leave a comment, share the videos with your people. That's it. Now back to the podcast. In this episode, we have a very special guest, somebody who has seen the ins and outs of the tech world that we live in right now. Early employee at Apple, currently chief evangelist at Canva, the host of Remarkable People podcast that has had guests like Jane Goodall, Mark Rober, Steve Wozniak, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and so many more. Guy Kawasaki, thank you so much for taking the time and coming onto this show. It means a lot to me. How are you doing today?
It's my pleasure. I'm glad to help you.
So Guy, I've heard a lot about you. I've read a lot of your stories. I'll give you a quick story. I had an instant connection with you when you told your story about once you finish your MBA, you started working at a jewelry business. I did the same thing. I started working at my father's store who has a jewelry business. And then you learned a lot about sales and marketing there. And that's exactly the same thing that I did. I learned about negotiation tactics, how to communicate properly with customers. So I had an instant connection with you. I read about your story. I mean, it's amazing. But for the few people who don't know about you and are watching this podcast, can you please give us your background?
Sure.
What's your story? What's your journey like?
Yeah, so my name is Guy Kawasaki. I am currently the chief evangelist of Canva, and I'm also host of the Remarkable People podcast. Now, I was born and raised in Hawaii. I went to school in California. And after I graduated from college, a few years later, I ended up as the software evangelist for the Macintosh division of Apple. So my job was to convince companies to write Macintosh software and create Macintosh peripherals. And I did that for a few years, and then I left. I started some companies. I returned as Apple's chief evangelist. And then I started some more companies, and now here I am, and it's been a very good and very interesting life. And along the way, I guess I'm known for expertise and knowledge in marketing and sales and evangelism. I've written 16 books, and the reason why I'm on so many podcasts right now is because my 16th book has just launched, and it's called Think Remarkable.
Talk to me about that. I've read a lot of chapters of it. I love it. I'm still halfway there. You talked about 3 stages: growth, grit, grace? Like, how did you come up with that?
Yeah, well, I think it was as I conducted interviews. We have about 225 interviews right now. And it became pretty clear that most remarkable people have gone through similar stages. So, growth means that you think you can grow and learn and, just develop greater expertise. And even with the desire to grow, it takes grit because growing is not easy. So you need the grit mindset. And as I've talked to older people on my podcast, I've noticed that they're always talking about paying back and helping young people. And that's grace and graciousness. So I love tricolons, like I came, I saw, I conquered. And I also love alliteration. So that's why I have a tricolon and each word begins with GR. So that's the structure of the book.
Like, I'll get into the details of it as well. Like, how can somebody develop a growth mindset? Like, I'm going to talk to you about myself. I didn't have it. I had to work on myself a lot, and it took a lot of trial and error, failures. Like, how do you explain somebody this is how you do it?
Well, I think you did a very good job explaining it just now that, you don't get a growth mindset just by waking up one morning and saying, I'm going to be a growth mindset kind of guy now. So the starting point is the realization that there is a growth mindset and there's a fixed mindset. And if you have a fixed mindset, you don't think you can grow. You don't think you can gain new skills and new knowledge. So I would say step one is to realize that, oh my God, I got a fixed mindset and that's going to limit my success and it's going to limit what I can do in the world. And then once you come to this conclusion, you need a growth mindset, then you need to do a lot of sampling. You need to try new things, study new subjects, meet new people, increase the diversity in your life so you're exposed to more things.
And the second stage that you talk about, like the grit, I mean, I think that's where like a lot of people who are in the early stages, they give up on, like, because they don't have that trait in them. So how can somebody develop or understand that they have that trait in them to know that, hey, this is the second stage that I should work on?
Yeah, for grit is, in a sense, all these stages, it's a matter of someone removing the scales from your eyes. So, you need to understand that, and maybe there is a different mindset, not the one I have. And similarly with grit, that I think what's most useful is to look at inspiring examples of people who work for decades to, master a new skill or master a subject. And they didn't give up. And you know what? I don't know anybody who's remarkable who doesn't have grit. It just takes grit because nothing comes easy. And the more you're trying to accomplish, the harder it's going to be. And so I think you need to hear stories of inspiration of people working for a long, long time. And they derive joy from something that many people would say is, the worst thing to do. I mean, there's people on the outside looking in saying, why do you do that? Oh, it's so hard, and, et cetera, et cetera. But you happen to love it, and that's the key.
Speaking of joy, like I heard a story about your love for sports cars, and you shared an interesting story about a few young girls, teenage girls, trying to scream something. Can you tell us that story again?
Yeah, so this is about 20 years ago. I was an owner of a 911, a Porsche 911. I was in Menlo Park, California at a stop sign, and I look to my left and there's a car full of teenage girls and they're making eye contact and they're giggling and they're laughing. And so I thought, now I'm really famous. Even teenagers know who I am because of my work at Apple or my books or my speaking. And the girl in the front seat asked me to roll my window down, and she sticks her head out and she says, "Are you Jackie Chan?" And that was a funny moment. And I tell that story because one of the lessons of being remarkable is you should not care too much about how you get motivated. What's key is that you are motivated. And for me, you may find this a little silly, but one of my little goals in life is that someday Jackie Chan is at a stop sign, and there's a car full of teenagers to his left, and and somebody in the front seat of the car says, "Are you Guy Kawasaki?" So, you got to have goals in your life.
You worked at Apple in the 1980s. You talked about it in your book as well. You worked with Steve Jobs. What was it like working with him?
Well, Steve Jobs, I mean, everything you heard about him and seen in movies and, all this stuff is probably a little bit accurate. I mean, he was a very tough guy, very demanding, very little patience with people who he viewed as not competent. And so working for him was very intimidating because you knew that he would rip you to pieces in public and just humiliate you. And that's, kind of contrary to most theories of good management. But I tell you something, fear works. So I was deathly afraid of being embarrassed by Steve Jobs. So, all the stories, as I said, is kind of true. And you may think, oh, my God, I would never want to do that. But I tell you something, I don't know anybody who worked for Steve Jobs who says, I wish I had never done that. I mean, it was, a very difficult thing, but a very valuable experience. And I would not be where I am were it not for Steve Jobs.
You were at Apple when Think Different commercial was launched, right? So
Yes.
Can you talk about that story you shared in your book as well?
Yeah, well, so this is 1997. And at that time, many people thought that Apple would die. So Apple came up with this, and actually Apple's ad agency came up with this ad campaign of Think Different. And it featured people like Albert Einstein and Picasso and Richard Branson, Amelia Earhart. I think Nelson Mandela was in there too. And the theory was that, if you want to be like these visionary people, these people who have made a difference, you need to think different. And thinking different back then meant using a Macintosh as opposed to an IBM PC or a Windows PC. And when this ad campaign was unveiled to the marketing team at Apple, we loved it. And at the end of the meeting, the ad agency guy says to Steve, I got 2 copies of all these videos. I'm going to give one to you, Steve, and one to Guy. And Steve says, don't give one to Guy. And I spoke up. I said, well, Steve, is it because you don't trust me? And Steve said, yes, Guy, I don't trust you. And then at that moment, I just decided to go for it. And I said, Steve, it's okay because I don't trust you either. It probably cost me tens of millions of dollars, but it was worth it.
I mean, that's really something. But did you learn anything from that?
Maybe the lesson is you should just shut up sometimes. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean,
I didn't tell that story to set an example for other people. Okay. I just told that story because, I think back then in the 1997 timeframe, thinking different was enough. But now the way the world is sort of, in a heap of trouble, it's not enough to think different. You need to think remarkable.
And like you also shared, like it takes a lot of energy to be an asshole. Like it's better to be a nice guy. I mean, I agree with you on that 100%. Like you came on Gary Vee's podcast, like you shared that, and I instantly fell in love with that line. Like it's 100% true. Like you don't have to be so harsh on people. Like it's just better to be a good person.
Yeah.
So like you worked. Let's talk about the business side of it. You worked on the Mac division. So what was it like working there in that division, and what were the key things, stories that you can share about part of your life?
It was just a great experience because we were truly on a mission. And, we thought that if IBM and Microsoft succeeded, it would lead to a dystopian totalitarian government, which is kind of what the United States is headed to now. So we were just ahead of our time. So we wanted to prevent that. And the way you prevent that is by bringing out technology that is democratizing computing so that anybody could use a computer. And there's 2 components to that. One, of course, is cost. And the other is user interface, because if you had a cheap computer that nobody could figure out, it won't matter, right? So you had to have both. And so we were on a mission to prevent dystopia, basically, to prevent, the suppression of human expression and rights.
And like Do you think the AI age that we're living, it's going to alleviate that?
Yes, I absolutely do. I think that AI may be the last hope to save the human race, because clearly men and I mean male leaders are doing a horrible job. So I think step one is we let women run the world, and then step two is we let AI run the world. But we got to stop letting men run the world.
Talk to me more about that. Like, can you share like how and why?
Well, I mean, it's just if you look at history, I mean, if you look at all the wars and stuff, it's always about the male ego, right? It's because I was insulted because you did something, I got to get revenge. I need to stand my ground, blah blah blah. I mean, it's always the male ego at some level that causes conflict.
And like once you got over that period, you left Apple, right? And then you did a lot of ventures. You then had an opportunity to work with Canva as chief evangelist.
Yes.
So looking back, what were those similarities that you observed while working at Apple that you thought,
sure,
I need to bring the same lens at Canva? Quick one, if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, please do me a small favor, hit those buttons, you know the drill. Your support is the only reason that I've been able to have these incredible guests on this podcast who are trying to bring more value to you. So please do me a small favor, hit that subscribe button, like the videos, ring the bell icon, leave a comment, share the videos with your friends and family who are trying to build a business, whichever platform you're consuming this on. That's it. Now, back to the podcast.
Well, Macintosh democratized personal computing. It made personal computers so that more people can use them. And I think Canva has democratized design so that it made it so that you didn't have to buy or rent Photoshop. You didn't have to spend weeks and weeks learning Photoshop. You could instantly make graphics with Canva. So in that sense, Macintosh and Canva both democratized something. Macintosh democratized personal computing, and Canva is democratizing design. So I happen to like to democratize things, I guess.
Yeah. And when you speak of bringing on more loyal customers, what were those things that you saw at Apple that you brought at Canva? Like, what were those details like?
Sure. So, certainly we brought the concept of evangelism from Apple to Canva. So evangelism comes from the Greek word meaning bringing the good news. So that's what an evangelist does. You bring the good news of Macintosh. And we applied the same principles to Canva. You brought the good news of Canva. And the good news of Canva is that anybody can make beautiful designs and be a better communicator. So when you do that, Canva has evangelists today, just like we had evangelists for Macintosh. And there are people who they love to get people to use Canva, not because they're stockholders or not because they're employees, but because they view it as good news, and it's very satisfying to bring good news to your friends and family.
Yeah, that's 100% true. Like I use a lot of it. Like I use it for my work as well, and it's amazing. You're like one of the most successful public speakers as well. Like I love listening to you. You can hold people's attention, which is like a really big deal in this world that we live in. So how did you get good at communication? And like, how can people learn from that?
So I worked first at Apple from 1983 to 1987. And in that time frame, I saw Steve Jobs speak a lot. And it was very intimidating because, you're sitting there and you're watching Steve Jobs, who was one of the greatest business communicators ever. And you're thinking, like, I can't even come close to that. Like, I should never speak because, I just look like a pile of crap compared to Steve Jobs. And so what happened was I wrote a book called The Macintosh Way, and a software company wanted me to come speak about the Macintosh Way. So they hired me to speak, and that was my first paid speech. And so that was like 1988, let's say. So now 1988 to today, that's a mere 36 years. And in those 36 years, I probably gave, I probably gave 50 a year, right? So,
wow.
Well, not every year, but let's just say 50. So, that's like we're coming up to like 2,000 speeches.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you that part of becoming a good speaker is you just get comfortable with it. And the way you get comfortable with it, like anything else, is you have to do it a lot. So when I'm speaking 50, 75 times a year, you get good at it. It's just the sheer quantity. You just need to, it's grit. You just need to keep going.
Somebody who's listening to you right now, they don't know that they have that innate skill in them, but people around them told them that you cannot be a good communicator. You speak like this. And then they believed that. How can somebody get out of that framework and understand that,
Well,
no, I am actually a good communicator?
So what you're describing is that external people are forcing the fixed mindset on you, right? They're telling you, you cannot be a good speaker. You're fixed at a low point. And we've been discussing, you got to believe in the growth mindset. Now, I can't tell you if you're a horrible speaker, you can just like read one book or practice for 15 minutes. You're going to be a great speaker. That's not true. It took me years to get to where I am, but I'm telling you, it's possible. It's possible. And I would say that if you compare it to athletics, right? So if you're 5 feet tall, you are not going to do well in the NBA, right? I mean, it's just the height is just not there. You could be the world's greatest shooter, the world's greatest jumper, et cetera, et cetera. You're probably just not going to make it in the NBA. Now, speaking is not like that, right? People don't measure your height or your weight when you speak. You either are a good communicator or you're not. And I'm telling you that communication is a skill that you can acquire, and you do it just by sheer volume.
It is an acquired skill, and it takes a lot of courage to even just try when you are in that place. But
well, that's grit.
Yeah, that's great. Yes. But I think the part where people lack is like accepting, like this is where I'm at and I need to go there. So how do you get out of that? At least accept that part, like this is where I'm at.
In a sense, you just have to believe in yourself. You have to believe that the growth mindset is true. And, this is not just for public speaking. I mean, I took up surfing at 60, all right? So I'm 60, I'm almost 70. It's taken me 10 years to be a kind of a intermediate surfer. And believe me, for the first few years, it was pathetic. But if you have a growth mindset, you just keep pushing. You don't give up. Yeah. And maybe 10 years later, you're a decent surfer. It takes 10 years, and I live next to the ocean. I surf almost every day. Today I surf twice. Okay, so I'm not telling you that it takes 10 years because you only surf 3 days a year. It took me 10 years surfing. I probably surf 240 days a year, right? So I've surfed probably 2,500 times. I mean,
yeah. That's very inspiring. So I'm 31, right? I have friends who are in their late 20s, right? And they tell me that I feel so old. Like I feel so old. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can do this.
Okay, but now you know somebody who started surfing at 60. I also took up ice hockey at the age of 44. So, that's 34 years too late for hockey and 50 years too late for surfing. I'm telling you, it can be done. It ain't going to be easy. So, you're 30. You could wait another 30 years before you try surfing.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I'm going to try a lot of different things. I don't have that.
You can go to Goa and try surfing.
Oh, yeah. Goa's pretty amazing. So, yeah, definitely. Why not? Let's talk about business, Guy. Like you've worked in the tech world. I want to know a lot about, like, did you love working there? Like, what was your experiences like? Thought of trying different things and you wanted to get out of tech world, or you had different ideas that you wanted to test? Like, what were those days like?
Well, I mean, it wasn't really kind of an intentional, well-planned plan. I just happen to fall in love with things every once in a while. So I fell in love with Macintosh, and I fell in love with starting a software company, just the concept of being a founder of a software company. I fell in love with social media. I fell in love with podcasting. I fell in love with writing. This is my 16th book. When you write 16 books, it's not because you feel so about writing. When you write 16 books, you really love writing. Okay, I mean,
Yeah.
you cannot deny that a person who has written 16 books doesn't love writing. And so it was, for me, it was just constantly exposing myself to new things, and every once in a while I fell in love with something and I pursued it.
Speaking of writing, like, did you write a lot when you were younger, or was it like you did it later in your after you got in the business world?
No, when I was younger, i.e. in high school, I had a English teacher who was the toughest teacher that I have. Steve Jobs, the toughest boss. Harold Keeble's the toughest teacher. And he's long gone, and I just imagine him. He's like in heaven, and he's scratching his head, and he's saying, "Of all my students, Guy became an author and wrote 16 books. Wow." What happened? How come I didn't see that? That becoming a writer was not planned either. I mean, listen, basically, I hope people listening to this podcast, they say, you know what, like, as Steve Jobs said in his Stanford commencement speech, that you can only connect the dots looking backwards. So, don't try to connect the dots going forward, because you're going to fail. And there's so many unpredictable turns in life that you cannot optimize that.
So somebody who has a chip on the shoulder, your teacher, he said that out of all things, Guy is an author. Somebody has been through it or is going through it right now. That teacher saying that you're not going to be successful, and they have that chip on the shoulder already. So how do you even make sure that you're going to make it?
First of all, no teacher should tell somebody that they cannot do something. I mean, okay, so if you're 5 feet tall, somebody's going to tell you cannot play in the NBA. You're probably right. Okay. But I don't think a teacher should be telling a student, you're too dumb, or your grades are too low for you to be a writer. I mean, listen, getting the right scores and getting the right grades, don't get me wrong, that's an admirable thing to do. But I think if you're a teacher, that you should not be shutting people's dreams down. You should be encouraging them to dream. Now, encouraging them to dream does not mean you tell them it's easy, you're a natural, it's going to be so fast, because nothing worth doing is going to be easy and fast. Nothing.
I mean, we are brought up in that world. Excuse me. So even I had that, like, grades meant a lot. If you feel like it doesn't matter a lot. And my sister is in that place right now, and I tell her, like, it's not going to matter if you fail or you pass. If you don't know about the Indian education system, we are taught that either you can be a doctor or an engineer. Like, apart from that, there's nothing else in the world, right? So that's the mindset that we are conditioned with, and then a lot of people break out of it. I wanted to get into the business world. I tried a lot of things, failed, tried a lot of things, again failed, and something clicked. And like, I've been doing that a lot recently. But it's hard to explain to somebody who has been conditioned in that way, that like, all these things don't matter a lot in life later in your years. Or let's talk about somebody who has actually accepted that this is the path to success. So how do you understand that this is not the only thing that's out there?
Well, I think that you have to look for examples, and there are many examples of people who don't have the quote right background or the highest scores or anything like that. And Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, both dropped out of college. Now, I'm not saying that if you're an entrepreneur, therefore you should drop out of college, because many successful entrepreneurs finished college. Okay, so I'm not telling you to drop college to be a better entrepreneur. So I think you just have to look at, life as just it's kind of unpredictable. And one of the things I learned in my book is that people spend too much time trying to make the right decision. And what they should spend more time doing is making their decision right, which is you decide something and now you're going to make that decision work. That is a really important skill, maybe more important than making the right decision.
That's very interesting. Like I want to know about that as well, because I struggled with that in my early days. But somehow I figured out what worked for me. But I cannot go back and understand, can I use that same analogy in different things? Like let me explain like what I'm trying to say. So let's say I wanted to try my luck in business, right? So you decide that, and then you figure out a way that this is the decision that I'm going to make it right. But then there are a lot of missteps, there are a lot of setbacks, there's a lot of pivoting in that small window that we have, right? So, and when you're trying new things, you don't know if this is the right path to like success.
Right.
So how do you pivot at the right time and understand that,
you know what,
I need to go in a different direction?
Nobody can explain that. I think that probably the biggest factor in that is luck, because you always hear about people who say, I believed. Everybody was telling me to give it up, and I kept believing. And then one day, the first order came in, the first check came in, and now I'm a huge success. Well, you got to also ask, how many people pivoted and then succeeded? And so, that's one of the dangers of reading business books, is that it's not scientifically sound necessarily, right? Because if you were to truly do a scientifically valid test, it would have to be that, you had two identical markets, two identical companies, two identical management staffs, two identical products, and one company's pivoted and the other didn't. And, which came out best? You need a controlled experiment. And what I just described is impossible in the real world. So I could tell you many examples of pivoting, succeeding. I could tell you also many examples of people who stuck with it and succeeding. And so, I don't know. There's not a science that says, it's 87% more likely if you pivot that you'll be successful. I mean, maybe somebody has done that, but I sure don't know about it. Yeah. So, I think the lesson is that you keep trying, at some point, if you just stop believing and it's just impossible. Okay, pivot. But I don't think you can really know if you did something right until after. Like you're going to say, that was the smartest thing I ever did was stick it out. Or, that was the smartest thing I ever did was change the business. But, one of the problems is that in business writing and in life, you only hear about the success stories.
Yes.
Right. So you only hear about the people who pivoted and succeeded. It may be that they're the only company that has ever done that. So everybody tells us, this is this great example, but 99.9% of the companies who pivot fail. And I'm making these numbers up. I don't know if that's true, but so, you have to keep in mind that you are only going to hear the success stories. You're not going to hear about the companies that pivoted and died.
Right.
And on the flip side, you are not going to hear about the companies that stuck with it and died. You're only going to hear about the companies who pivoted and succeeded. So it's complicated.
Yeah. Talking about success stories, Guy, like there's a chapter in your book. I believe that this is the first step to even understand that this is the path to success. Embracing vulnerability. Like, can you talk about that? Quick one. If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, please do me a small favor. Hit those buttons. You know the drill. Your support is the only reason that I've been able to have these incredible guests on this podcast who are trying to bring more value to you. So please do me a small favor, hit that subscribe button, like the videos, ring the bell icon, leave a comment, share the videos with your friends and family who are trying to build a business, whichever platform you're consuming this on. That's it. Now, back to the podcast.
Yes. So vulnerability, the word comes from Latin, and it means wound. So what I'm saying is you got to embrace the fact that the flip side of growth is vulnerability. That when you decide you want to take up hockey at 44 or surfing at 60, you are embracing vulnerability because you might drown. You might get hit with a puck. I mean, there's a lot of things that can go wrong in those two sports. And if you are so afraid of sharks or you're so afraid of drowning that you don't try surfing, then you have the fixed mindset. And so if you want to grow, you have to say, all right, I'm going to go surfing even though I might get hurt. A shark could eat me, although that's statistically almost impossible. But and I mean, that's just what it takes. Some things, a lot of people say some things need to be seen to believe. Some things need to be seen to be believed. I think a more important saying is some things need to be believed to be seen. That's more useful.
I love that. Guy, let's talk about business again. For any business to succeed, sales engine is the biggest part. And you're a big advocate of sales. Sales is everything. How do you build a good sales team?
I think you build a good sales team by finding people who have empathy for the customer, that they feel the customer's pain, they feel what a customer is going through, and I think that makes a good salesperson. A good salesperson has high empathy, and so you need to go and see what your customer is going through, or actually be your customer. I mean, if you're working for a bank and you want to have loyal customers who love what you do, you should probably use your own bank app.
Yeah.
And when you use your bank app and you say, God, this app just doesn't work. It's so counterintuitive. I can't sign in. It's asking me for CAPTCHA. And it's like two-factor authentication. I can never get the text on time. There's so many problems with our bank's app. Well, guess what? If you're going through it, guess who else is going through it, right? So if you want to be a great salesperson, you have to have empathy.
I believe in that. We're taught in business schools. We don't hear these concepts like empathy, being a good leader. You have to be compassionate towards your employees and everything. But we don't hear all those things in the traditional business school that we are living in. So how do you teach that to somebody who is in a B school and is understanding about businesses, who comes to realize it and who realizes it later that this is the real world?
Maybe you shouldn't go to business school. Although I have an MBA too, but I'm coming back to the story you started with. That's why it was very good for you and I to start in the jewelry business.
Yeah.
Because that is hand-to-hand combat. I mean, that's very different. If your first job is, you're going to work for Google and you have infinite brand awareness and you have infinite market power, you have a monopoly on search engine optimization and all that. And so you think sales is, I got to figure out, should the background of the homepage be blue or should it be green? And let's do an A/B test. And, something is 1% better. We got to go with the blue background. Some people think that's sales. That's not sales. Sales is an analog hand-to-hand combat thing.
I remember my early days, I was told that you're going to fail. Why are you quitting this? You've worked a lot, you've studied a lot, you've got good grades. I didn't enjoy it. Although it seemed like an impulsive decision, I was just doing what I loved. And I'm not sure a lot of people have that. And if they would give that a shot.
Someday you're going to look back and you're going to connect the dots in your life. And you're going to say, I did this and I did that. And then if you're intellectually honest, you're going to say, I had no idea what I was doing, but somehow it all worked out, and you can connect the dots.
That's the best part. I mean, that's where you have the most memorable stories to tell. Speaking, we talked about success and business. You have to have some sort of mindset there to even get on that path. So what do you believe in? Do you believe in shooting with a star and landing on the moon, or do you believe that you should measure your goals?
I have to admit, I am more in the camp of shooting for the stars, landing on the moon. But even that, I mean, you can quantify that too, right? I mean, there's a way to break that down into meaningful goals. And I mean, it gets back to my concept that, once you decide this is how to get to the stars, then you just have to focus on making that decision right. And you focus on making that decision right. And maybe, the best you can do is get to the moon, but then you got to the moon. That's better than just being stuck on the earth.
Yeah. So let me rephrase, so there are different levels to growth as well, right? So
Yes.
let's say in the first stage, your levels are different. For you, that landing on moon means different. In the second stage, landing on moon means different. When you have a fixed mindset, you can measure that, like you're trying to go from A to B, and this is the success level. And when you don't have a fixed mindset, you're open to growth. There are different levels.
Right. Well,
right?
I would make the case that if you have a fixed mindset, you're saying, I don't want to go to the moon. I don't want to go to stars. I'm perfectly happy here on Earth.
Yeah,
that's the fixed mindset.
And do you believe that fear hinders that growth?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, fear serves a purpose. Fear prevents you from truly doing stupid things, but fear can also prevent you from doing something smart that's hard. And like, if you ask me how you separate the two, the answer is, I don't know. You just have to take a lot of shots.
Yeah. And there's a part of it that selflessly you want to give back on your journey. Like, I have that in me. But selfishly, you also have your personal goals. Like, you want to build this thing, you want to build this podcast. I mean, you have your goals. Everyone has their goals. So how do you balance that selfishly and selflessly?
Well, I don't know if your goals necessarily mean that you're selfish. I mean, you're entitled to your goals. I just think it's, I think that the remarkable people, they believe that the rising tide floats all boats, so that your gain is not necessarily somebody else's loss, and somebody else's gain is not necessarily your loss. And if you can have goals like that, where it's a rising tide floating all boats and everybody can be a winner, I think that's the optimal perspective.
Let's get into the details of it. Guy, in your second stage of the book that you've written, you've talked about grit. You've shared do good shit, get beyond Eureka, and sell your dream. Talk to me about that.
Well, I think making a difference means that you do good shit, which means, you make a Macintosh, you make Canva. It has to be good. Otherwise, it's not going to be successful. And you can have a lot of grit, but I'm telling you, it makes it a lot easier if you do good shit. And if you do good shit and you have grit, you really will be successful. So, this is a call to people to have high expectations and to try to do really great things. Like, that's what remarkable people do. They're not content to do, mundane second-class things. They want to do the best that they can. And I think that is very important. Now, once you decide on your goal, getting beyond Eureka means, okay, you got the idea, but the idea is probably the easy part. You got to get beyond the idea, which is you got to make a prototype. You got to actually ship. You got to make a factory. You got to get a dealer distribution channel. You need a lot of little things for you to be successful. So you got to get beyond Eureka and stop thinking that, oh, I got the idea. That's the hard part. That's not the hard part. That's the easy part.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And do you think to even execute on those ideas, like you have to have a strong why to motivate you every day? Like every day you have to show up, you have to execute, you have to show that tenacity.
Listen, people who are remarkable, they show up every day. I mean, that's just, they don't quit. It's grit. They do not quit. And it's easy for the author to say that, right? Because I'm not the one who has to keep showing up. But that's absolutely true, that you just need to keep showing up, because most people cannot keep showing up. They give up.
In the book, you talked about the last stage, that's grace. you have to uplift and inspire. And you mentioned a lot of topics like getting over imposter syndrome, enhanced decision making, developing skills like negotiation. And then there's the biggest one, like accountability. Like you have to be your own boss. You have to own up your own decisions. So talk to me about that. How can somebody have that in them?
Well, I mean, it's a matter of intellectual honesty, right? That remarkable people don't blame others. Now, it could actually be the fault of others, but remarkable people, you either are remarkable and you make a difference or you're not. And there are many factors that could stand in your way, but you just have to keep showing up and persevering. I'm not trying to tell you that my book is going to show you that being remarkable is easy, because that's a lie. It is not easy. And that's just what it takes. That's why, you know what, if it was easy to be remarkable, there would be more remarkable people in the world.
Yeah, 100%. And in the final chapter of your book, you talked about leaving no regrets behind.
Yes.
And like the reason that I came across you was like I love your work. I've read about it earlier, and then you showed up on Gary Vee's podcast, and Gary Vee is a big advocate of like regret is the biggest poison in the world, and I totally see that in you as well. Like you leave no regret behind. So tell me, how did you have that, and can you talk more about that?
So one of my friends is a guy named Daniel Pink, and he did this regrets project where he asked people all over the world to talk about what they regret. And he figured out there's some very common regrets. And one very common regret is not that you took too many chances and you failed. The more common regret is you didn't take a chance. You never really, took the risk. And people regret not taking risk and not going for it. And then the second thing that people regret is that they let their social connections to their friends and family die. And so as they look back, they say, I wish I had kept these relationships up. I wish I had, been more entrepreneurial and daring. And so, I mean, it's good to know that that's the most common regrets. And so, you should learn from other people. So
that's true. I believe in that too. Like you should have no regrets behind. So, Guy, it was amazing speaking with you. I just wanted to say that like I love your work. Like you've had a big impact on my. Like I just want you to succeed more. I hope Remarkable People podcast lands on the moon, and like we speak again hopefully someday. Any last few thoughts that you'd like to share with your audience?
Well, I just want to make it clear to people that being remarkable is because you have made a difference. It's not because you decided to be remarkable. You have to decide how to make a difference, how to make the world a better place. And if you make the world a better place, people will believe you are remarkable. So there's a sequence. You make the world a better place, people will think you're remarkable. That's the key. So this book is about how to make a difference. It's not a book about how to reposition yourself as a remarkable person. All right.
A fantastic podcast, Guy. Like, thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you for your flexibility, and all my best to you.
Yeah, if there's anything I can do to help you, please let me know.
All right. You take care. Thank you very much.